The day Monica Ellis packed her desk at Kang International, 37 people watched her walk to the elevator. 37 people who had seen her arrive before everyone else, every single morning, for 3 years. 37 people who had eaten the pastries she brought on Fridays without ever learning her birthday. 37 people who had forwarded her reports under their own names, borrowed her ideas in meetings, and smiled at her in the hallway the way you smile at furniture that happens to be in your path. 37 people watched her leave. Not one of them said, "Wait," and Monica, poised, composed, her spine as straight as it had always been, pressed the button for the lobby, exhaled once through her nose, and let the elevator doors close on all of it. The only person who did not watch her go? Jae-Won, CEO, the most powerful man in the building. He was in a meeting. He didn't even know she existed in the way that truly mattered, not until she was already gone. This is the story of what happens when a woman stops waiting to be seen, and what it costs the man who refused to look. Hey loves, welcome back. Or welcome for the first time. Either way, I'm so glad you're here. If you've been with this channel for a while, you already know the kind of stories we tell. Stories about women who carried entire rooms on their backs and still got left standing outside the door. Stories about the slow, quiet ache of being excellent in a world that only rewards loudness. Stories about choosing yourself not dramatically, not overnight, but in the small, deliberate moments that add up to a whole new life. Today's story is called Unseen. And I want to ask you something before we begin. Have you ever been in a room full of people and still felt completely invisible? Have you ever poured yourself, your real, brilliant, irreplaceable self into something, only to watch someone else get the credit, the attention, the recognition? If you have, this story is for you. Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever been her. And stay until the end because I promise you, the payoff is worth every minute. Let's get into it. Monica Ellis grew up understanding, very early, that excellence was not optional. She was the eldest daughter of a Haitian-American nurse mother and a father who drove trucks for 22 years and never once called in sick. In their house, on the east side of Atlanta, love was expressed through showing up, through doing the thing even when the thing was hard, through not asking for applause because the work itself was its own reward. Monica inherited all of that. She graduated summa cum laude from Spelman with a degree in business economics, got her MBA from Georgetown on a partial scholarship she supplemented by working 30 hours a week as a research assistant. She had a mind that could see patterns before the data was even finished loading, the kind of analytical instinct that some people called a gift, and she called practice. She joined Kang International at 29, a mid-level analyst position, because that was the door that opened. And Monica had learned that you walk through the doors that open, and you build new ones from the inside. Her office, if you could call it that, it was more of a glass-walled alcove between two conference rooms, became the quietest engine in the building. She arrived at 7:15 every morning, not to be noticed, but because her brain worked best before the noise started. She'd have her oat latte, her yellow notepad, her laptop, and 2 hours of uninterrupted clarity before anyone else logged on. By 9 a.m., she had usually already solved the problem the rest of the team would spend the afternoon arguing about. Her colleagues liked her in the casual, surface-level way people like someone who makes their lives easier without demanding recognition for it. Her direct supervisor, a man named Daniel Park, no relation to the family that owned the company, had a habit of taking Monica's quarterly analysis, making 1 or 2 small adjustments, and presenting it to senior leadership as a collaborative effort in which he had done most of the collaborating. Monica noticed. She always noticed. But she was playing a long game, and she knew better than to burn a bridge before she had a boat. What she wanted, what she had always wanted, was to lead. Not to be the person behind the person. Not to be the architect whose blueprints got handed to someone else to sign. She wanted to stand in front of the room with her name on the presentation and her voice carrying the weight of everything she knew. She wanted to build something. She had a vision for an internal strategy division that didn't yet exist at Kang International, a team dedicated to emerging market research in West Africa and the Black diaspora consumer base, a demographic the company had been consistently, almost willfully, ignoring. She had spent 8 months developing the proposal on her own time. 67 pages. Data, projections, case studies. A 3-year roadmap. It was, by any objective measure, some of the most sophisticated internal research the company had ever seen. She submitted it in November. By February, she had not received a single response. But Monica kept working. She kept arriving at 7:15. She kept solving the problems. She kept being excellent, because excellence was not something she switched on and off based on whether anyone was watching. That was Monica Ellis. What she had not yet learned, and what this story is really about, is that there is a difference between enduring invisibility with dignity and accepting it as permanent. She was about to learn the difference. Kang Jae-Won did not become CEO of Kang International at 38 by accident. He became CEO because he was the kind of man who, at 14, had memorized his father's accounting books while his classmates were playing video games. The kind of man who, at 22, had restructured the family's failing import business in 6 months while simultaneously finishing his economics degree at SNU. The kind of man who spoke 4 languages, read financial reports the way other people read novels, and could dismantle a boardroom argument with a single, quietly delivered question. He was brilliant. He was disciplined. He was, and this is the word that everyone who met him reached for, eventually formidable. He had a stillness to him, the kind of stillness that powerful people sometimes cultivate as a strategy, and sometimes are simply born with. When Jae-Won walked into a room, the energy in the space shifted, not because he demanded attention, but because something in the human nervous system recognized the presence of someone who did not need to demand anything. He was also, beneath all of that, deeply alone, in a way that he would not have admitted to anyone, including himself. He had a penthouse on the 62nd floor of a building he owned. He had 2 assistants, a rotating team of executives who deferred to him with something very close to fear, and a social life that consisted primarily of charity galas he attended out of obligation and dinners with business contacts he found mildly tedious. He had been in love once, in his late 20s, with a woman named Hyrin, who had eventually told him that loving him felt like trying to have a conversation with a closed window. He had spent 3 days considering whether she was right before concluding that she was, and had not revisited the question since. He was not a cruel man. He was not unkind. He simply operated at a level of remove that insulated him from most emotional entanglement, and he had, over the years, come to mistake that remove for self-sufficiency. At Kang International, he was everywhere and nowhere at once. The company ran smoothly enough that he could spend most of his time focused on macro strategy, acquisitions, and the kind of high-altitude thinking that rarely required him to engage with the texture of daily operations. He knew his senior leadership team by name. He knew his floor managers. Below that level, his staff existed to him as a kind of collective efficiency, a system that worked, which meant it did not require his attention. Monica Ellis, therefore, existed to him the way a well-functioning elevator exists: useful, invisible, taken entirely for granted. This was not malice. That almost makes it worse. This was simply the comfortable blindness of someone who had never been required to look. It happened on a Thursday in March. The quarterly leadership review. Kang International's senior team, 12 people around a mahogany table on the 41st floor. Monica was not in the room. She was never in the room, but her work was there, as it always was, wearing someone else's name. Daniel Park presented the emerging market analysis that Monica had refined over 6 weeks. The room was engaged. There were questions. There was the particular electric quality that fills a space when a genuinely new idea has been introduced. Jae-Won sat at the head of the table, and he was interested in a way he rarely was during these reviews. He asked 3 follow-up questions. He requested a deeper breakdown of the West Africa consumer data. He said, and these are the words that would matter later: "Whoever put this together has a real strategic instinct. This is the kind of thinking we need more of." Daniel nodded, as if accepting a compliment for work he had done. Monica heard about this the next morning. Not from Daniel. From Simone, one of the junior analysts who had been in the room to take notes, and who told Monica the story with the careful neutrality of someone who knows they are delivering bad news and is trying to be gentle about it. Monica sat very still while Simone talked. She felt it in her chest, that specific, familiar weight. The thing that happens when you realize the work you bled for has been received beautifully, and none of the reception is for you. She had felt it before, in smaller doses, a meeting where her idea came back to her through someone else's mouth, an email thread where her contribution had been absorbed and attributed elsewhere. But this was different, because the CEO had said, out loud, whoever put this together, and the answer to that question was Monica, and no one had said her name. She did something she had not expected to do. She pulled up the 67-page proposal she had submitted in November. She checked the timestamp. She read her own executive summary, the one she had rewritten 11 times, and she felt, for the first time in a long time, genuinely tired. Not the productive tiredness of hard work, the other kind. The tiredness that comes from pouring water into a cup with a hole in it and only now, finally, acknowledging that no amount of water is going to fill it. But here is where the story pivots, because what happened next was not the thing Monica was trained to do. What she had been trained to do by her upbringing, by her industry, by years of being told that quiet excellence would eventually be rewarded, was absorb the hurt, recalibrate, and continue. What she did instead was this. She opened a new document on her laptop. She titled it, Me, and she started writing, not a resignation letter. Not yet. A vision. But first, there was one more moment, one she would remember longer than the meeting, longer than Daniel's quiet theft. That same afternoon, Jae-Won was moving through the 38th floor, a rare appearance, some impromptu walkthrough his assistant had arranged. He passed Monica's glass-walled alcove. She was at her desk, her yellow notepad beside her, her eyes on her screen. He paused outside the glass not because of her, but because he was reading a message on his phone, and in that moment, Monica looked up. Their eyes met. He looked through her the way you look through a window when you're trying to see what's outside. Then his phone call came through, and he walked away. And Monica, who had been seen by exactly no one in the way that mattered, turned back to her screen, exhaled once through her nose, and thought, enough. The shift in Monica was not loud. That's the thing that people who observed it later would say, that it didn't look like anything from the outside. She still arrived at 7:15. She still did her work, and she did it well, because that was not something she was capable of doing halfway. But something had changed in the internal architecture of how she moved through the day. She stopped volunteering. Not in a sulking way, there was no performance of hurt in Monica's withdrawal. She simply stopped adding extra. She stopped being the person who caught the falling plate before it hit the ground. She stopped sending the follow-up email that made other people's loose threads disappear. She stopped filling the silences in meetings that were not her meetings to fill. She answered what she was asked. She delivered what she was assigned. And every hour that she used to give away for free, she redirected. She spent her lunch breaks, which she had previously eaten at her desk while working at the small park 2 blocks from the office. She bought a good pair of headphones. She called her mother more. She went back to the ceramics class she had abandoned 2 years earlier when work had gotten overwhelming, and she remembered, with something like grief, how much she loved working with her hands. But the most important thing she did was this. She finished the business plan. Not the 67-page internal proposal. Something bigger. Something hers. A consultancy. An independent firm focused on strategy for brands trying to reach Black diaspora markets across 3 continents. She had the expertise, the data, and this was the part that had always been missing. She finally had the hunger. Not the hungry to prove something hunger that had driven her 20s, the clean, directional hunger of a woman who knows exactly what she wants and has stopped waiting for permission. She called it Ellis Strategy Group. She opened a business bank account on a Tuesday. She registered the LLC on a Wednesday. She spent her weekends building a website that was, honestly, better than Kang International's. She did not tell anyone at the office. She did not tell Daniel, who had been watching her lately with a wariness he couldn't name. She did not tell Simone. She did not tell anyone who might carry the information somewhere it didn't belong. She was not running away. She was running toward. And while all of this was quietly happening, something else, something she would not have predicted, was beginning on the 41st floor. Jae-Won first noticed something was different on a Monday morning in April. He was reviewing the weekly analytics summary, a document that crossed his desk every Monday without ever requiring much of his attention, because it was always thorough, always sharp, always the kind of clean thinking that made his day run more efficiently. That morning, it was thorough and sharp. But something was different. It took him almost the entire document to identify what it was. And then he had it. The extra layer was gone. The previous summaries had always contained what he asked for, and then this additional dimension, this way of extending the data forward into implication, of following the thread beyond where it was required to go. Someone had always been adding 10% more than they needed to, and this week, whoever it was had delivered exactly 100% of what was requested, and no more. He read the document twice. It was good. It was perfectly adequate. But something about the absence of the extra made it feel like a piece of furniture had been moved 2 inches, and the room was somehow wrong now. He called his assistant, Yuna, who compiles the weekly analytics summary. Yuna paused, the specific pause of someone who is mildly surprised that this question is being asked. It comes through Daniel Park's team. A woman named Monica Ellis does the primary analysis. Daniel reviews and submits. Jae-Won said nothing for a moment. Monica Ellis. Yes, sir. She's been with the company about 3 years. She's very... Yuna stopped herself. She does very good work. Why the hesitation? I was going to say she's very underutilized, but that's probably not my place. It's fine, Jae-Won said. Thank you, Yuna. He set down his phone and looked out at the city below his office windows. Monica Ellis. He thought about the emerging market analysis from March. He thought about the 3 questions he had asked, and the quality of the thinking behind the answers, and the way Daniel Park had accepted the praise for it with the confidence of a man who had practiced accepting things that weren't his. He thought about something else, too, though he would not have been able to articulate it clearly yet. The walkthrough on the 38th floor, the woman behind the glass, the brief, direct eye contact before he had looked away. He had not looked away on purpose. He had simply been somewhere else, as he always was. He wondered, briefly, if he had been somewhere else too often. Over the next 2 weeks, he began to pay a different kind of attention. He went back through 6 months of the analytics summaries. He pulled the internal research documents that Daniel's team had produced, and this time, looked at them with the specific eye of a man trying to identify the original voice beneath the editorial layer. It wasn't difficult. The language, the frameworks, the approach, there was a consistency to the thinking that had a clear signature, and that signature was not Daniel Park's. He reviewed the submission log for internal proposals, found the 67 pages submitted in November, opened it. Read the first 15 pages before his 4 o'clock meeting, and the remaining 52 pages that evening in his penthouse, with a glass of single malt he forgot to drink. When he finished, he sat for a long time in the kind of stillness that is different from his usual stillness. This was not the stillness of control. This was the stillness of a man who has walked confidently through a room for a long time and has just realized the floor is different than he thought. He had said whoever put this together has a real strategic instinct, and whoever had put it together had been sitting 62 floors below him for 3 years, being entirely invisible. He opened his contacts, found Yuna's number, then he closed his phone. Not yet. He needed to think first, which, for Jae-Won, was the equivalent of what other men called feeling something. The name that changed everything, at least for Jae-Won's internal temperature, was David Osei. David Osei was 34, Ghanaian British, and had recently opened a boutique investment consultancy in the city that was causing a quiet stir in the circles Jae-Won moved in. He was the kind of man who radiated competence in a way that felt effortless and was clearly not the polished ease of someone who had worked extremely hard at appearing relaxed. Jae-Won encountered him at a private equity dinner in early May. And they had had the kind of conversation that happens rarely, where two people recognize each other's frequency within the first 10 minutes and spend the rest of the evening in something like competitive mutual respect. It was at this dinner that David mentioned, casually, that he had been introduced to an extraordinary analyst recently, someone doing independent strategy work focused on Black diaspora markets. He said her name like it was a discovery, like a man holding something rare up to the light. "Monica Ellis," he said. "Have you heard of her? She's extraordinary. I'm trying to bring her on as a founding partner." Jae-Won heard the name and felt something happen in his chest that he was not prepared for. He kept his face still. He was very good at keeping his face still, and said, "The name is familiar." David smiled, and there was something in the smile that made it slightly more than a professional reference. "She's incredible. Her frameworks on diaspora consumer behavior are unlike anything I've seen. And she's building the firm herself. I'm telling you, give it 18 months and everyone in this space is going to know who she is." Jae-Won went home that night and sat with the feeling for a long time. He eventually identified it. It was not quite jealousy, or rather, it was jealousy's more sophisticated sibling. The feeling that comes when you realize you have been in possession of something extraordinary and have not recognized it as such, and now someone else is recognizing it very clearly. And the recognition has a warmth in it that is not purely professional. He thought about what Yuna had said. She's very underutilized. He thought about Daniel Park accepting compliments in meetings. He thought about the proposal in his inbox, 67 pages, submitted in November, and the fact that until 2 weeks ago, it had been sitting there unread. He thought about the moment at the glass-walled alcove, the brief eye contact, the way he had walked through it. He thought about all of this with the careful, uncomfortable focus of a man who has never been wrong in a way that has cost him something, encountering for the first time a mistake with a price he did not yet know. There is a specific kind of reckoning that happens to men like Jae-Won. It is not dramatic. It doesn't arrive as a single thunderclap of understanding. It comes in waves, small, persistent, accumulating each one, carrying a little more of the tide. Until one morning you wake up, and the shore looks completely different, and you're not entirely sure when the landscape changed. He started reading more of her work. Not just the internal documents, though. Those alone were enough to recalibrate his entire model of what his analytics team was actually capable of. But he asked Yuna, carefully, to find any external publications, presentations, or academic work that a Monica Ellis with a Georgetown MBA might have produced. There were 7, 3 published in industry journals, 1 keynote address at an emerging markets conference in 2021, for which she had apparently taken personal days, a co-authored paper on Black consumer purchasing power that had been cited by researchers at 4 universities. He read all of it, and what he found, in the architecture of her thinking, was a person, not an employee, not a function, a full, formed, blazingly intelligent human being who had a perspective on the world that was specific and earned and entirely her own. She wrote about markets the way certain poets wrote about weather, with the understanding that what we call economics is really just people choosing based on what they value, and that the failure to understand what people value and why is not a data problem, but a listening problem. She had been trying to tell his company this for 3 years. He had not listened. He thought about this one morning in his office, watching the city below, a city full of 37th floors and 29th floors, and the invisible labor that kept everything moving, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, chastened. Not humbled in the performative way. Actually, genuinely, sitting with it, humbled. The specific humility of someone who thought they saw clearly and has discovered a significant blind spot. He also felt, and this was more complicated, something adjacent to longing. Not in a purely professional sense, in the sense that a person can become vivid to you once you begin to see them clearly, and once they are vivid, the vividness is hard to switch off. He thought about what David Osei had said. Founding partner. The warmth in his voice when he said her name. Jae-Won pressed his fingers together on his desk and thought, for the first time in a long time, that he had made a significant error. And he was not sure if he had enough to offer to make it right. He found her, which is to say, he created a reason to find her at an industry networking event in late May. He did not send Yuna ahead with a message. He did not arrange a meeting through proper channels. He went himself, which was unusual enough that two of his senior executives noticed him leaving the building on a Thursday evening without explanation. She was standing near the window on the venue's third floor, talking to a woman Monica's age in a natural linen blazer, and they were laughing about something in the easy, unguarded way that Monica almost never allowed herself at work events. She had a glass of sparkling water in her hand. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress that was elegant without being performative, and her locks were pinned up in a way that somehow communicated both precision and ease. Jae-Won recognized the feeling in his chest for what it was this time, because he had been sitting with it long enough to identify it. He crossed the room. She saw him before he reached her. He watched her composure settle, not stiffen, not shift settle, the way a woman who has prepared herself for many kinds of moments prepares for one more. She finished what she was saying to her friend, turned to face him, and waited. "Miss Ellis," he said. "Mr. Kang." Her voice was measured, warm in its surface quality and entirely unreadable beneath. "I was hoping we could speak for a moment." She considered this. Not performing consideration, actually considering it. Then she excused herself from her companion and moved with him to a quieter corner of the room. He began to speak. She let him. He told her he had read the proposal the full 67 pages. He told her it was the most rigorous internal strategy document he had received in 5 years of running the company. He told her that he had, with some delay, come to understand the extent of her contributions to his company's analytical work. He was precise, because imprecision was not something he was capable of. He named specific things: the West Africa consumer data, the frameworks, the keynote from 2021. He had done his research, and he wanted her to know that his recognition was not casual. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to sit with it before you answer." He nodded. "That proposal sat in your inbox for 6 months. In that time, my direct supervisor presented 3 separate iterations of my work to your senior team and was praised for it. I submitted a request for a direct 30-minute review with anyone in senior leadership about my strategic vision for the company, and I never received a response. I watched my ideas move through this organization, and I watched my name not move with them." She wasn't raising her voice. She hadn't been trained to raise her voice, and she hadn't needed to learn how. The weight in what she was saying didn't require volume. "I'm not asking you to feel badly about it. I'm asking you to understand what it actually means, not as an oversight, not as a systems failure, not as something that happened to me, but as a pattern that I participated in by staying silent, and that your organization allowed by never creating the conditions where someone like me could be seen at the level I was operating. Now you're here," she said, "and I want to ask, what changed?" Jae-Won was quiet, the kind of quiet that meant he was actually thinking, not managing. "I read your work," he said, "and I understood what I'd missed." "Why did it take 3 years?" He didn't look away from her. "Because I wasn't paying the right kind of attention. And because the systems I trusted to surface talent were failing, and I didn't examine them closely enough." She nodded slowly. "That's honest. I'd like to offer you." "I'm going to stop you there," she said, and her voice was not unkind, but it was completely firm. "Whatever you're about to offer me, I appreciate the intention behind it. But I've spent 3 years building value inside a structure that didn't value me, and I've spent the last 2 months building something of my own. I'm not the same person who submitted that proposal in November. I'm not looking for a seat at your table." "What are you looking for?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment, really looked the way she had not been looked at in years. "To be in a room where people see me clearly," she said, "and right now, that room is one I'm building myself." She said it without hostility, without triumph, without the performance of a woman who has rehearsed her power moment. She said it the way she said everything, with absolute conviction, and the particular elegance of someone who has stopped needing to prove anything. Jae-Won stood in the quiet she left, and understood, for the first time, what he was actually dealing with. Not a woman he had underestimated. A woman he had never looked at closely enough to estimate at all. Monica resigned on a Friday morning in June. She did it the way she did everything properly, professionally, with 2 weeks' notice, a thorough transition document, and no dramatics. She thanked the colleagues who deserved to be thanked. She said nothing to Daniel, because there was nothing to say. She stopped by Simone's desk on her last day and told her, quietly but directly, to stop shrinking herself in meetings. The day she walked through the lobby for the last time, she felt the strangest thing. Not sadness, not triumph, relief. The deep, cellular relief of a body that has been holding its breath for a very long time and has finally been allowed to breathe all the way out. She took the train home. She changed into comfortable clothes. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and the business plan she had been building for months. And she worked until midnight, and it felt, for the first time in years, like work that was entirely hers. Ella's strategy group went live the following Monday. She had 2 clients already, small commitments, but real ones, from people in her network who had seen her work and understood its value before she did. She had a business mentor she had cultivated quietly over the previous year, a woman named Claudette who had built and sold 2 consulting firms and who told Monica, in their second meeting, "You were always going to end up here. You just needed something to push you." The work was harder, in the practical ways. There was no IT department. There was no assistant. There was no institutional infrastructure that simply existed around her. The way the air of a well-built building exists. She was everything: the strategist, the business developer, the finance manager, the person who fixed the printer at 10 at night. But she was building something that had her name on it. Not as a footnote, not as a credit buried in an appendix. Her name, on the door, in the email signature. In the byline of the articles she was now writing openly, under her own name, on a LinkedIn page that began gaining followers faster than she had expected. People were beginning to see her. Not because she had changed. She was, in all the ways that mattered, the same Monica she had always been. It was just that the room had finally become the right size for her to be visible in it. The months after Monica left were not, for Jae-Won, comfortable. Not because the company faltered it didn't, at least, not dramatically. But Jae-Won, who prided himself on running a precise and functional operation, began to see, now that he was looking, the number of places where the machine had been operating on invisible labor. He restructured his analytics department. He released Daniel Park from his position, not immediately, not dramatically, but methodically, after a review process that made it clear the promotion he had been angling for was not going to materialize. He implemented an anonymous contribution attribution system so that work could be traced to its origin before it was presented upward. These were operational corrections. Clean, logical, bounded. What was less clean was the thing he did when he was not working. He followed Ella's strategy group's progress. Professionally, he told himself it was professionally. He read her articles. He watched the quiet, steady accumulation of her client list and her reputation. He watched David Osei announce her as a founding strategic partner of his consultancy, in the same breath as his firm's first major award nomination. He thought about the conversation at the networking event. He replayed it with the uncomfortable honesty of a man who knows how to assess his own performance. He had done well. He thought he had been honest. He had been specific. He had not been defensive, but she had been right to shut down the offer. He had been, even in that moment, still thinking in terms of bringing her in, of solving the problem by incorporation, of making her visible by attaching her to his structure. He had not yet understood that she was no longer available for attachment. He sat with this for a long time. He thought about Hiren, who had told him that loving him felt like a closed window. He thought about how he had evaluated that statement as though it were a business report identifying whether it was accurate, filing his assessment, moving on. He had never done the harder thing, which was to ask, what would it cost me to open the window? He was not a man who struggled with most things. This, the vulnerability of genuine accounting, of sitting inside a mistake without trying to optimize his way out of it, was the thing that had always cost him. He was in his late 30s. He had a company, a penthouse, the respect of a professional world that operated in a frequency most people couldn't access. And he was, on the question of how to actually be known by another person, almost entirely inexperienced. He started making changes. Not for Monica, at least. Not only for Monica. For himself. The kind of changes that come from a man who has looked at his life from a new angle and found it wanting in ways that money and success can't address. He called his mother more often. He cleared 2 weekends a month of commitments and left them deliberately unscheduled, which was an act of discipline in the opposite direction from all his other discipline. He sat through the discomfort of having less to do without filling the space with more work, and in that space, he began slowly, imperfectly, to understand what he had been avoiding. He had been so focused on building things that he had forgotten to inhabit them. He reached out in September, not with an offer, not with an opportunity, not with anything that required her to do anything for him. He sent an email drafted and deleted 4 times before he sent it, which was unusual for a man who wrote 50 emails a day without hesitation that said, in full, "Miss Ellis, I read your piece in Strategy Quarterly this month. The framework you proposed for understanding diaspora brand loyalty is something I've shared with my entire senior team. It should be required reading for anyone working in global markets. I also wanted to say without any agenda attached to it that the conversation we had in May has stayed with me. You were right about the conditions at Kang, and you were right to do what you did. I hope the firm is going well. From what I can observe from a distance, it is." Jae-Won Kang. He did not ask for a meeting. He did not suggest coffee. He did not attach an opportunity or a proposal or a reason for her to respond beyond choosing to respond. He sent it, and he left it there. 3 days passed. He did not check his inbox more than usual, or if he did, he was honest enough with himself to acknowledge it. On the 4th day, she replied, "Mr. Kang, thank you for reading it. I'm glad it was useful. The firm is going well. I launched our 2nd major engagement last week. I appreciate you saying that about May." Monica Ellis. It was brief. It was professional. It offered nothing beyond what was asked for. It was, in its restraint, exactly the right response for where they were. He read it twice, set down his phone, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, smiled to himself not because he had won something, but because he recognized the quality of what was on the other side of the conversation. It was going to take time. He understood that now in a way he hadn't before, not as a tactical obstacle to be managed, but as something that was actually appropriate, as something he had to respect. He had time. He was willing to use it correctly. The months that followed were made of small, consistent things. He sent her work to colleagues when it was relevant, not as a strategy, but because it was genuinely the best thinking available on the topics it covered. He attended a panel she spoke on in October, in an audience of 200 people, and he did not approach her afterward. He simply listened. And the listening was its own kind of communication, a signal that did not demand anything in return. She noticed. She was the kind of person who noticed everything. They exchanged a handful of emails over the fall, professional, careful, with something around the edges of them that both of them could identify without naming. He asked for her perspective on a West Africa expansion question his team was wrestling with. She gave it, clean and precise, with a note that if the company wanted to engage formally, Ellis Strategy Group's rates were attached. He engaged them formally. She sent an invoice. He paid it promptly. It was, from the outside, entirely professional. From the inside, it was 2 people moving carefully toward each other, in a way that required both of them to be very honest about the distance that remained. She invited him to a small industry gathering she co-organized in November. He came. They talked for 40 minutes in a corner of the venue, and the conversation was the kind that doesn't announce itself, that just keeps opening, room after room, into something neither person had expected. She found herself thinking, afterward, about what it felt like to be in a room with someone who was actually present, not performing presence, not managing her, just there. Listening with the full attention of someone who has learned, recently, how to actually listen. She was careful with herself. She was not the Monica who had spent 3 years giving everything to people who took it as their due. She was paying attention to how things felt, not just how they appeared. She paid attention to the way he spoke about his own failures. Not with the deflecting self-deprecation of someone managing their image, but with the careful, uncomfortable honesty of someone who was still working through something. She paid attention to the way he spoke about her work specifically, substantively, in a way that demonstrated he had actually engaged with it. She paid attention to the fact that every time they interacted, he asked for nothing beyond the interaction itself. These were not small things. She knew that now. She had spent years in rooms where people took enormous things and made them look small. She knew the difference. She was not ready to call it anything yet, but she was beginning to be curious about what it might become. In December, he asked if she would have dinner with him, not a business dinner. He was specific about that. She said yes, and it was the simplest, most considered yes she had ever said. They had dinner at a small, quiet restaurant that was not the kind of place someone takes a person to impress them. It was the kind of place someone takes a person when they want to be able to hear them. They talked for 4 hours. She told him about growing up in Atlanta, about her parents and the particular grammar of love she had been raised on: love as showing up, as doing the hard thing, as not requiring applause. He listened in a way that told her he was hearing not just the words, but the structure underneath them. He told her about the feeling he'd had reading her proposal, the specific, uncomfortable feeling of recognizing something extraordinary that you had failed to recognize at the right time. He said it without making it about himself. He said it as a gift back to her, an acknowledgement of her value offered with no expectation of being thanked for the acknowledgement. She asked him what had changed, not accusatorially, genuinely. He thought about it. Then he said, "I stopped trusting my own efficiency as a substitute for actual attention. I thought because things were running well, I was seeing clearly. I wasn't seeing at all. I was just maintaining." She nodded. "That's a lonely way to live." "It is," he said. "I've been thinking about that." She drove home that night and sat for a while in her car, outside her building, not yet ready to go inside and be by herself with the feeling that was settling in her chest. It wasn't certainty. It wasn't the uncomplicated brightness of early infatuation. It was something more serious, something that had texture and weight and was asking her to pay attention. She paid attention. By the following spring, Ellis Strategy Group had 6 major clients and a waiting list. Monica had been featured in Fast Company, been named to a 40 under 40 list she'd been nominated for by David Oze, and given a keynote at a conference where, the year before, she would have attended as an anonymous seat in the audience. She had hired her first 2 employees, both women, both brilliant, both the kind of people who had been told they were too much of something and had channeled it into competence. Her office was a converted loft in a building she had specifically chosen because it had good light. There were plants everywhere, a personal rebellion against the sterile glass of her previous life. There was a small ceramic bowl on her desk that she had made herself in the class she'd returned to. It was imperfect, and it was hers. She was happy in a way that was new and specific, not the happiness of having something to prove, but the happiness of someone who has arrived at the place that is actually right for them, and who knows it. Jae-Won was part of her life. Carefully, intentionally, in a way that she had set the pace for and that he had respected entirely. He showed up when he said he would. He asked before he assumed. He supported her work without trying to manage it, and he was learning genuinely, imperfectly learning how to be present with someone in the way that Hiren had once told him he couldn't. He had made a decision, sometime in the fall, that whatever this was, whatever Monica was willing to allow it to be, he was going to treat as the most serious undertaking of his life. More serious than any acquisition, any partnership, any deal. Because he understood now, what he hadn't before, that people are not systems to be optimized. They are living things that require the same quality of attention and care that anything you value requires. And that if you neglect to give that attention, you don't get to be surprised when what you've neglected chooses to go where it is wanted. He had missed her the first time. He was not going to miss again. And Monica, who had spent so many years giving away what she should have kept, who had been unseen in rooms full of people, who had arrived at 7:15 and left at 8 and been thanked by no one in any of the ways that mattered. Monica had something now that was better than being seen. She was known, not by the 37 people who had watched her walk to the elevator, not by Daniel Park, who had since left the industry and whose name she thought of rarely and without bitterness, not by the institutional structure that had held her just beneath the level of visibility for 3 years. She was known by the clients who called her by her first name and meant it as respect, by the 2 women she had hired who came to her with their hardest problems and trusted her not to diminish them, by her mother, who cried when she read the Fast Company profile and called Monica 3 times in one day, by Claudette, who showed up to every milestone with flowers and a precision that was its own form of love. And she was known, in the particular way that matters between 2 people, by a man who had looked through a window and spent the better part of a year learning how to actually look. Jae-Won was not the ending of Monica's story. He was one of the good things in the middle of it. And that was, for the first time in a long time, exactly enough. She was standing at her office window one morning in April, 1 year and 2 weeks after she had pressed the elevator button for the last time at Kang International, when her phone buzzed. A text from Jae-Won. "I'm outside. I have coffee. Is it too early?" She looked at the message, looked at the plants on her windowsill, looked at the ceramic bowl on her desk, imperfect and hers. She typed back, "Come up." And then she turned back to her window. And the city below was the same city it had always been, full of every kind of visibility and invisibility, of people seen and unseen, and seeing and learning to see. And Monica Ellis stood in it, in the office that had her name on the door, and felt, cleanly and without complication, like herself. Fully, finally, herself. And that's the story of Monica Ellis, the woman who was excellent before anyone was paying attention, who was building before anyone gave her permission, who pulled back not out of defeat, but out of clarity, who chose herself, not as a consolation prize, but as the main event, and Jae-Won, who was brilliant and accomplished and completely blind in the ways that mattered, who had to do the uncomfortable, essential work of learning to actually see. I want to say something before you go. This story is about romance, yes. But it's also about something older and bigger than romance. It's about what happens when a woman stops performing her excellence for an audience that doesn't deserve it, and starts building a life that reflects who she actually is. It's about the difference between being wanted and being valued. It's about the kind of love and the kind of respect, the kind of partnership, the kind of life that you have to become the right version of yourself to receive. Monica didn't shrink. She didn't chase. She didn't perform hurt or manufacture drama. She just chose, clearly, precisely, with the same quality of attention she gave to everything. And that choice changed everything. If any part of this story lived inside you, if you've been her, in any version of these rooms, I want you to hear this. The work you're doing when no one's watching is not wasted. The version of yourself you're building in the quiet is real. The life you're constructing on your own terms is not a consolation. It is the destination. Don't let anyone take the credit for your clarity. Drop A if this story touched something in you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're new here, welcome. We tell stories like this all the time. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourself until then.